my name is Sheridan Publico, and I will be going over my website, which is about fetal alcohol syndrome. In my homepage, I detail what exactly fetal alcohol syndrome is. So, it's that developmental disorder that comes from maternal alcohol consumption. And then I also included who is affected and how common it is, as well as how it is transmitted. And so, moving on to my overall symptoms and signs that I included, I talked mainly about what happens in the nervous system and as well as how that impacts facial features. And so, I decided to include the different tissues that it affects in the symptoms because it will help me kind of piggyback onto that when I get to my tissue section. But I also included some visual ways to see how this impacts the child. So I put some more physical symptoms in an image as well as detailing that in the image legend. And so moving on, I did also discuss the diagnostic process for fetal alcohol syndrome. And so I talked about how the doctor is required, but I found this part interesting. You used a geneticist or a genetic counselor to kind of rule out other possibilities instead of kind of confirming that they have fetal alcohol syndrome. So yeah, I found that interesting. And then I did mention that fetal alcohol syndrome is a teratogen, and then I also mentioned that I will be explaining this more in the genes and signaling pathways section. So moving on to the tissue section, I decided to discuss glial tissue because fetal alcohol syndrome is greatly impactful to the nervous system. And so glial tissue is very important within this. So that's why I decided to include that information. And as you can see, I also provided two different images that describe over here, you can see what healthy glial tissue looks. But then when we get to the second image, you can see what happens when we have alcohol impacting that glial tissue. And then moving on from there, going back to the symptoms and signs, I went ahead and connected the tissues and how that impacts the symptoms and signs. So moving on from there, I am also discussing the genes and signaling pathways. So again, like I said earlier, I discuss more about what a teratogen is in this section, which I think is really important for knowing how the signaling pathways and genes are impacted. And then I decided to focus on genes for this website because of the time constraint. And then I specifically brought in the term of astrocytes because they go hand in hand with glial cells. And then I also included the GFAP gene because it's, again, directly related to those glial tissue. So moving on to treatment, I did emphasize that there's no actual way to cure fetal alcohol syndrome, but there's ways to mitigate the symptoms, which I put over here. And so the only way you can really um, ensure that your child doesn't have fetal alcohol syndrome is preventative care. So just not drinking alcohol while you're pregnant, no matter what stage you are pregnant in. And then in this section, I decided to put the new treatment options here because I thought it just fit more with the treatment section. And so this gives a more supplemental kind of route. So for instance, there's been signs that choline is used to mitigate adverse effects and potentially repair and reverse neural damage. And finally, I have my current research section. And so I did a little brief overview of the two findings that I'll be discussing. And then I also put some information about the vervet monkey and mouse model organism. And so using that information, I furthermore described how fetal alcohol syndrome can cause the phenotypes that it shows. And then I just provided my references, and that's it.